Hey guys, tonight we're digging into the crusty, occasionally unidentifiable world of Victorian food. Forget high tea with dainty sandwiches or movies where everyone's politely dabbing the corners of their mouth. Tonight, we're talking about the real Victorian diet, the stuff that got stuck in your teeth, haunted your dreams, and sometimes actually killed you. So, before you settle in, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, switch on a fan for that white noise, and get as comfortable as possible. But let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what people actually ate before refrigerators? Did Victorians ever enjoy a hot meal? Or was everything just a different shade of beige? Was meat pie just code for don't ask, don't tell? And could you survive a single day on watery gruel? Or would you trade your family's silver for a single fresh vegetable? Congratulations, you've just woken up in 1852, in the middle of London. You have no idea where your next meal is coming from, your breath smells faintly of onions and gin, and you're about to learn the true meaning of mystery meat. Good luck. It's morning in Victorian London. You're hungry, but your options are limited to yesterday's bread, watered-down tea, or something called dripping, which is just beef fat on toast. You eye the crust with suspicion, trying to figure out if it's still bread or already turning into a science experiment. Congratulations, breakfast is now an act of survival. Let's set the scene. You wake up in a crowded, damp room above a shop, or jammed into the upper floor of a ramshackle terrace. The wallpaper is peeling, the air is thick with coal smoke, and there's a suspicious puddle in the corner you've learned not to question. Outside, the distant rattle of horse carts mixes with the cheerful yelling of someone selling yesterday's news or today's eels. But inside, all thoughts are on one thing: breakfast. Or, as it's sometimes called, what's left. Your first challenge is bread. Victorian bread, for the lower classes, is an experience. This is not an artisanal sourdough or a soft bakery roll. This is the kind of bread that's seen things. It's dense, it's stale, and it's possibly been improved by the local baker with a handful of chalk, alum, or sawdust, whatever stretches the flour and the truth. You thump it on the table, and it makes a sound only slightly softer than a police knock. But you're hungry, so you chip off a piece, gnawing carefully to avoid losing a tooth. If you detect a subtle undertone of plaster, congratulations, you're getting your daily minerals. Next comes tea. In the Victorian working-class home, tea isn't the fragrant, leafy luxury you might be picturing. It's weak, so weak, in fact, that it mostly serves as a gentle reminder of what real tea tastes like. This is the second, third, sometimes fourth use of the same leaves, boiled in water that's mostly hot, often grey, and always questionable. Milk, if you have it, is more of a suggestion than a reality, often floating with mysterious bits that may or may not have been alive yesterday. Sugar is precious and strictly rationed. 1 spoonful for the whole family, if you're feeling flush. You sip, swallow, and try not to make eye contact with whatever just drifted by. Feeling adventurous? There's always dripping. Dripping is what happens when you save the fat and juices from Sunday's rare roast, if you're lucky enough to have had a roast at all, and spread it on toast for the rest of the week. It glistens, it wobbles, and it's the closest thing you'll get to butter until payday. If you're having a really good week, maybe there's a spoonful of jam, which mostly tastes of hope and the faint memory of strawberries. The main event, though, is simply not being hungry. Breakfast for the poor is about calories, not taste. It's about getting something in your stomach before a 14-hour shift at the factory, the docks, or the matchstick workshop. If you're a child, you wolf down whatever you can before being shooed out the door, cap askew, to earn a few pennies sweeping chimneys or selling flowers on the street. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you get a slice of cheese, hard, sweaty, and with a flavour that could knock out a small horse. Let's not forget porridge. Oatmeal, if you can afford it, or more often, gruel, which is basically oats waved in the vague direction of water. Thin, lumpy, and the exact color of defeat. You choke it down, spoon scraping the bottom of the bowl, hoping for one last oat, like a gambler with his last coin. Some mornings, there's nothing at all. You might just drink water and pretend it fills you up, or gnaw the crust of bread and dream of bacon you'll never see. In the end, breakfast is less of a meal and more of a daily negotiation with disappointment. But it's also a strange kind of comfort, a routine, a ritual, proof that you made it through another night. So you dust off the crumbs, steel yourself for the day ahead, and thank your lucky stars if you didn't break a tooth. Welcome to Victorian breakfast, where hunger is guaranteed, flavor is optional, and survival is the only thing on the menu. You shuffle to the workhouse for your daily bowl of gruel. It looks like it was made by someone who lost a bet with flavor. Gruel is mostly water, a little bit of oats, and the lingering sadness of every soul who's ever eaten it. It's technically food, but only in the legal sense. Let's talk about the workhouse, the place where breakfast dreams go to die. You stand in line with a crowd of tired, shuffling people, men, women, children, all united by one thing: hunger and a sense of quiet resignation. The air smells of damp clothes, coal smoke, and something suspiciously medicinal. Conversation is minimal because there's not much to say, and besides, it's hard to complain with your mouth set in a permanent line of disappointment. Eventually, you reach the front of the queue. There's a large, battered cauldron, attended by a woman who radiates the kind of joy only bureaucracy can bring. She ladles out your portion with the enthusiasm of a tax collector. The gruel splashes into your bowl, watery and pale, with the texture of unfinished wallpaper paste. You can see maybe 3 oats bravely floating in there. 4, if you tilt the bowl toward the light and squint. The rest is just a warm puddle, dotted with the occasional mysterious lump. You take your bowl to the long wooden table, where everyone else is already hunched over their own bowls, faces blank and spoons moving in slow, practiced circles. The only sound is the gentle scraping of metal against tin, and the occasional cough from someone who probably caught consumption before breakfast. You stare at your gruel, briefly wondering if the color is natural or the result of an enthusiastic cleaning session with the industrial soap. What's actually in the gruel? That depends on the mood and budget of the workhouse overseer. Some days, it's literally just oats and water. Other days, they spice things up with a pinch of salt. Or if you're really lucky, a splash of old milk that's just on the right side of suspicious. For flavor, there might be a stray weevil or two. Protein, they call it. Very trendy if you ignore the legs. The consistency is variable, but always hovers between sad soup and watery cement. If it gets cold, it develops a skin so unyielding you could use it to patch a hole in your shoe. Now let's talk about the nutrition, or more accurately, the lack thereof. Workhouse gruel is designed to keep you alive, but not thriving. You get enough calories to make it to lunch, but not enough to start a rebellion. Scurvy is a constant companion, and you dream of oranges the way some people dream of winning the lottery. If you're a child, you're told the gruel will put hair on your chest, which is a bold claim for a meal that can barely manage to keep your eyelids open. There's no sugar, of course. Sugar is for the rich, or for people who steal it. Sometimes a kindly kitchen worker might slip in an extra oat, or a hint of treacle if someone made a clerical error at the warehouse. But mostly, it's bland, boring, and barely distinguishable from the wallpaper. You eat it because you have to, not because you want to. Every spoonful is an exercise in creative visualization. Imagine it's soup, pudding, literally anything else. And yet, for all its blandness, gruel is a strange comfort. It's a ritual, a constant, something you can rely on when everything else is uncertain. You joke about it with your workmates. Same recipe as last year? And sometimes, in the cold winter months, even watery gruel feels warm and almost filling. You scrape your bowl clean, more out of habit than hope, and face the day ahead, fueled by the power of 3 oats, half a memory, and pure Victorian stubbornness. That's workhouse breakfast for you. Low on taste, high on existential reflection. If you're lucky enough to be middle class, breakfast involves an aggressive amount of toast, marmalade, and enough tea to rehydrate the Thames. No one actually eats a full English breakfast every day. That's just for Sundays and people trying to impress their in-laws. Let's slip quietly into a modest but proud Victorian townhouse, where the morning sun slants through semi-clean windows and the comforting smell of burnt bread wafts down the hall. You're awakened, not by the crow of a rooster or the whistle of a workhouse warden, but by the gentle clatter of crockery and the distant, unhurried mumble of servants negotiating for the best kitchen scraps. The family is already assembling in the breakfast room, which is a nice way of saying the slightly less chilly side of the house. The middle-class Victorian breakfast is an exercise in ritual. Everything is staged for maximum appearance with minimum effort. Toast, the star of the show, is stacked high, crispy, golden, and already threatening to go stale if you so much as look away for a moment. The toast rack, a wire contraption designed solely to ensure your toast is never actually warm, takes center stage. Butter, or something pretending to be butter, sits on a little dish, hovering at that special Victorian temperature, too hard to spread, but soft enough to break a knife. Marmalade is considered a social status symbol. It glistens, it jiggles, and it's likely been made with enough sugar to stun a herd of oxen. Victorians have an almost cult-like devotion to their preserves. Orange, lemon, and, if someone's showing off, ginger marmalade compete for shelf space. You're encouraged to spread it thickly if you want to prove you're not afraid of dentist bills. Jam is allowed, but only if the marmalade supply runs low, or you're a rebellious aunt visiting from Bath. Then comes the tea, the undisputed monarch of the table. Victorian middle-class tea is not a casual affair. It's a carefully measured, obsessively brewed operation. The teapot is pre-warmed. Heaven forbid you skip this step. The leaves are loose, and there's a small army of teaspoons at the ready for endless stirring. The tea itself is strong enough to make your heart do a little tap dance, and the colour hovers somewhere between mahogany and please consult your doctor. Milk is added by the drop, never the gallon, and only after lengthy debate about whether it should go in before or after the tea. Sugar cubes clink daintily into cups. Another subtle way to say we're doing fine. Thanks for asking. Eggs may make an appearance if the household is feeling flush, but more often than not, breakfast protein is theoretical. Sometimes there's cold ham, sliced so thin it's basically a suggestion, or a kipper, smoked herring, that lingers in the air and your memory for hours. Most mornings, though, it's all about carbohydrates and hot liquid optimism. Children, if present, approach the table with varying degrees of enthusiasm. They're handed dry toast and a scolding about not eating too fast, too slow, too loudly, or in a way that might somehow shame the ancestors. Mothers cut crusts with military precision. Fathers rustle newspapers, glancing at headlines about railway strikes and the rising price of eggs, all while pretending not to notice the marmalade war happening between siblings. The entire breakfast is designed for efficiency, propriety, and the illusion of leisure. Conversation is polite and always one syllable away from talking about the weather. Any mention of real hunger is gently but firmly redirected to more suitable topics, like last night's dream or how Cousin Frederick is definitely marrying above his station. By the time the toast is gone and the tea has reached a temperature somewhere just above room temperature, the family scatters to begin their day. The toast and tea Olympics end, the marmalade is returned to its shrine, and you're left with the sense that you've participated in something important, even if all you actually did was carbo load before another day of Victorian respectability. Afternoon tea, a ritual that is half social climbing, half sugar consumption. You pour tea, add 3 spoons of sugar, then act surprised when your teeth start dissolving by age 30. There are cakes, but most of them taste like someone left bread out in the rain. Let's set the scene. It's late afternoon, the city is draped in coal smoke, and the streets outside are a muddy obstacle course for anyone in nice shoes. You are summoned, no, expected, to appear at the drawing room precisely as the clock chimes 4. The table is laid out like the final round of the Great British Bake Off, if the contestants were primarily interested in impressing their neighbour and quietly judging their cousin's marital prospects. The tea itself is treated with the respect due to a minor deity. Loose leaves, never bags, tea bags are still the stuff of wild futuristic fantasy. The water is boiled in a battered kettle, then poured with all the solemnity of a medical procedure. If you're lucky, the pot is actually clean and the water isn't flavoured with the ghost of last night's cabbage. But the most important part, the sugar, mountains of it, more than the GDP of several small countries, all destined for your teacup. Some guests will claim to prefer their tea unsweetened, but you know they're lying, or they were recently prescribed an expensive tooth elixir. And then, there's the etiquette. Afternoon tea is where Victorian manners go to flex. There's a right way to hold your cup, a wrong way to stir, and at least 3 ways to offend someone by simply looking at the wrong scone. Milk goes in after the tea, unless you're feeling rebellious and want to start a family feud. You nibble at the edge of your sandwich with all the enthusiasm of a hamster eating a tax bill, careful not to finish before anyone else. Laughter is polite and just a shade too loud. Everything is meant to signal that you are both refined and relaxed, even though your feet are asleep and you're one missed cue away from social ruin. Now, about the food. The centerpiece is, of course, the cake stand. 3 tiers of delicacies, all of which seem to share the same basic flavor. Slightly wet sponge. Victorian cakes were often more impressive to look at than to eat. If it's Battenberg, you're gnawing through layers of marzipan and pastel cake squares that taste faintly of soap and broken dreams. If it's seed cake, expect your teeth to be full of poppy seeds for the next week. There are sandwiches, cut into precise triangles, with fillings that run the gamut from cucumber and air to egg and sulphur. Sometimes you spot a rare jam tart, shimmering with sugar and hope. You pounce, only to discover the jam is mostly currants and existential regret. Tea time is less about hunger and more about status. You're not just eating, you're performing. Every gesture is loaded with meaning. How many cakes you take, whether you reach for the clotted cream before the jam, even the speed at which you refill your cup, all monitored by at least 3 elderly relatives and a family friend who hasn't blinked since 1849. The unspoken rule: never let on that you're actually hungry. Second helpings are for children, outcasts, or people who have already been cut from the will. Some guests attempt to impress by bringing their own tea blend, which, like most Victorian innovations, is either genius or hazardous. Perhaps it's infused with rose petals or tastes distressingly of medicine. Everyone murmurs approvingly while mentally composing a letter to the Times about the decline of British tea standards. By the end of tea, you're jittery from sugar, your teeth are sticky, and you've learned which cousin is secretly courting the curate. You excuse yourself politely, leaving the table scattered with crumbs, shattered dreams, and at least 1 napkin that will never come clean. The sun is setting, the city is getting colder, and you're already looking forward to supper, a meal where you can finally eat without having to remember which fork to use. Victorian bread. Hard enough to break a tooth, mysterious enough to contain literally anything. Adulterated with chalk, alum, or sawdust, it's less of a food and more of a chemistry experiment. If you can chew it, you win. Welcome to the staple of every Victorian meal, the loaf that could double as a self-defense weapon in a pinch. Bread, you see, is the one thing everyone eats. The poor, the rich, the hungry child clutching a farthing, and the baker who hasn't slept since the last Corn Laws debate. But don't be fooled by its wholesome, golden exterior. Victorian bread hides secrets, and not the good kind. First, there's the matter of ingredients. In theory, bread should be simple. Flour, water, yeast, salt. In practice, Victorian bakers faced more temptation than a cat in a fishmonger's shop. Flour was expensive, regulations were minimal, and everyone needed to stretch a penny. So in went whatever could bulk it up. Chalk, for that distinctive crunch and the added bonus of mild digestive confusion. Alum, a bitter white powder, made the bread look whiter and last longer, which is great if you're selling it, and less great if you're the one eating it, and wondering why your mouth tastes like a chemistry set. And then there's sawdust. Yes, sawdust. Turns out, if you sweep the bakery floor and look at the pile with just the right amount of desperation, it starts to look like free flour. You can't make this up. The result, a loaf that's dense, dry, and, if you believe the medical pamphlets, marginally more nutritious than chewing on your front door. Now, let's talk about texture. The good loaves, rare, precious, and typically reserved for the upper class, might be soft, springy, and even pleasant. The rest? Imagine biting into a brick. If the brick was trying to pass itself off as food, Victorian bread could shatter a weak molar at 20 paces. If you had all your teeth at the end of the week, it was either a medical miracle or you'd been living on porridge and hope. As for flavour, well, that's complicated. Sometimes, if the bread was fresh and relatively free of building materials, it tasted faintly yeasty, warm and comforting. Most of the time, though, it tasted like flour that had just lost an argument with the elements. Occasionally, you might detect the ghostly aftertaste of lime or a lingering grittiness that reminded you of last spring's trip to Brighton Beach. But what really gave bread its character was what you put on it. Butter, if you had money, dripping, if you didn't, or a scrape of jam so thin it could double as window frosting. Bread was more than just food. It was an economic barometer. White bread was aspirational, eaten by those who could afford the finer things in life, or at least pretend they could. Brown bread was for the masses, the practical, the people who'd never heard the words gluten intolerance and would have laughed themselves silly if they had. And then there were specialty loaves, rye, barley, potato bread, all of which were code for we ran out of wheat again. For the poor, bread was sometimes the only thing on the table. They bought it by the hunk, the heel, or the questionable slice from the street vendor who looked just shifty enough to be selling yesterday's leftovers. Children clutched chunks of bread as both meal and toy. If the bread was too hard to eat, you could always soak it in tea or stew, softening it into a paste that could, in the right light, almost pass for comfort food. And so you eat your Victorian bread, grateful for the calories, wary of the crunch, and always suspicious of what might be lurking inside. Is that a raisin, or did the baker's broom finally lose a bristle? The answer, as with so many Victorian mysteries, is best left unexplored. One thing is certain: if you can chew it, you win. If you can digest it, you deserve a medal. You eye a pie at the corner shop. It smells meaty? Maybe. Could be beef, could be rat. You're not asking questions. Victorian pies are where questionable leftovers go to get a second life. If you're lucky, there's more crust than filling. Let's talk about the Victorian pie. Beloved, feared, and suspiciously affordable. The working classes flock to the pie shop as a kind of culinary lottery. Will today's purchase be delicious? Or will it give you a story to tell your grandchildren about why you avoid the colour grey? The pies are stacked in the window, glistening in a way that could be described as tempting if you squint and ignore the faint whiff of cat. There's a layer of pastry, promising comfort, nostalgia, and possibly dental work if you catch a bit of bone. But inside, that's where the adventure really begins. The Victorian era is a time before refrigeration, quality control, or a national consensus on what meat means. Every pie is a gamble. Some are filled with pork, beef, or mutton, usually the bits that wouldn't make it onto a respectable dinner plate. Fatty, stringy, and heavily seasoned because nothing hides a multitude of culinary sins quite like a heavy dash of Victorian pepper and a splash of old gravy. If you're eating a particularly meaty pie in a working-class neighbourhood, you can bet your last halfpenny that what you're tasting is everything but the prime cuts. But it gets more interesting. Some pies are mystery meat in the truest sense. Whatever was left unsold at the market, whatever the butcher couldn't move, or whatever the local alley cat population left behind. There are horror stories, some based in reality, most in rumour, about pies filled with rat, pigeon, or the odd lost dog. Did that really happen? Let's just say food safety regulations were still in their infancy, and Victorians were famously pragmatic about not wasting protein, no matter the source. If you were lucky, or just flush with coins, you might splurge on a steak and kidney pie. This was considered posh, even though kidney covers a wide range of anatomical guesses. The flavour is strong, the gravy is rich, and you might have to negotiate with the odd chewy bit. Chicken pies exist, but only for the well-to-do or the delusional. The everyday pie is as much about the crust as the filling. Thick, doughy, and capable of keeping the mysterious innards contained for at least 12 hours. Unrefrigerated and attracting stares from hungry passers-by. The crust itself is a marvel of Victorian engineering. Cheap pies are mostly crust, thick, sometimes stale, always filling. It's a clever move. Fill up hungry bellies with carbohydrates, distract them from asking too many questions about the interior. In some neighbourhoods, the crust is so tough that it's rumoured you could use it to resole your boots, and in a pinch, some probably did. The truly desperate might soak their pie in vinegar or a suspicious brown gravy to soften the experience, physically and emotionally. Occasionally, pies are enhanced with dubious improvements, a dash of food colouring here, a sprinkle of dubious herbs there, all in the name of making it look slightly less like last week's leftovers. If you're really unlucky, your pie might contain a whole boiled egg, which is either a treat or an existential threat, depending on how long it's been there. Pie shops are everywhere. On the bustling corners of London, tucked under railway arches, lining the markets, or sold from portable pie stalls by cheerful vendors who definitely aren't interested in answering questions about sourcing. The pies are cheap, filling, and conveniently portable, a Victorian solution to the need for a hot meal on the go, with only a mild risk of mysterious after effects. And so you eat your pie, warm in your hands and mysterious in your stomach, grateful for the crust, suspicious of the filling, and quietly determined not to ask too many questions. After all, in Victorian England, the only real mystery is how you've made it this far with your sense of humour, and most of your teeth still intact. You step outside to the sound of a street hawker bellowing, "Hot eels, hot potatoes." For a penny you get a slimy, salty treat that somehow manages to be both too hot and suspiciously cold at the same time. Street food is the original fast food, minus all modern food safety. Victorian London's streets are teeming with more than just people. They're alive with the soundtrack of sellers touting their edible wares, each one trying to outshout the next. Forget drive-through windows. Here you sidestep horses, mud, and mysterious puddles to approach a rickety cart that might double as the vendor's bed after dark. The air is thick with smoke from coal fires, the honking of impatient cabbies, and the unique aroma of questionable protein. Let's start with the eels. Eel, for reasons lost to time and questionable taste buds, is the street food star of Victorian London. These slippery little critters are fished from the Thames or imported from somewhere slightly less alarming. They're boiled alive, then chopped and served up in a jellied mass, the consistency of which could politely be described as challenging. If you're feeling posh, you might go for stewed eels, served hot, salty, and chewy enough to give your jaw a workout that rivals any gym membership. The potato, meanwhile, is the other hero of the pavement. Hot, charred and served in a small paper bag, or whatever newspaper was handy, these are the original comfort food. The best sellers roast them over glowing embers in a battered iron drum, their faces illuminated by firelight and entrepreneurial hope. You hand over your penny and receive a potato so blisteringly hot it could melt your fingerprints, only to discover the centre is still icy, nature's way of reminding you not to get too comfortable. As you chew your way through your purchases, you can't help but notice the sheer variety of other snacks on offer. There are whelks, imagine eating rubber bands dipped in seawater, pies filled with meat of debatable origin, roasted chestnuts, and the occasional questionable sausage, each one riskier than the last. Vendors call out in sing-song voices, each with their own catchphrase and unique selling point. Hot sheep's trotters, good for what ails ya, muffins, crumpets, get 'em while they're stale. If you're feeling flush, maybe you'll try a slice of penny pudding. A dense slab of steamed dough that tastes, with luck, vaguely of raisins and, without luck, exactly like the paper it was wrapped in. No one is asking about hygiene. The Victorian approach to food safety is hope for the best and chew quickly. Pots are rarely washed, spoons are communal, and everyone wipes their hands on the nearest available surface, which may or may not be a small child. You watch as your eel is served with fingers that have seen more coal dust than soap, and you realize that your immune system is about to get the work out of its life. But for all the risk, there's a strange comfort to it. Street food is cheap, filling, and most importantly, everywhere. For a penny or two, you can eat like a king, provided the king is okay with mystery meat and an iron stomach. The hot eel and potato seller is not just a merchant. He's the savior of the working man, the midnight snack for the late shift laborer, the slightly alarming breakfast for the hungover clerk. By the time you're done, your hands are greasy, your mouth tingles with salt, and you're not entirely sure if you've eaten dinner or survived a culinary dare. But you're full, you're a little warmer, and you've joined the centuries-old tradition of eating whatever's cheapest, fastest, and just this side of suspicious. Welcome to Victorian street food, where the thrill is in the bite, the gamble is half the fun, and tomorrow's stomachache is just another London memory. Friday arrives, and with it, the weekly religious obligation, fish. Don't get excited, it's probably dried, salted, and so tough it could double as a roof tile. If you're rich, you get salmon. If you're poor, you get something that once swam, but now only inspires regret. Let's set the mood. It's the end of a long, hard Victorian work week. You're sore, tired, and desperate for something remotely edible. But the church says, no meat on Fridays, and the church is not someone you argue with. Instead, you trudge to the market with a handful of coins and a prayer that today's catch won't be moving under its own power. For the well-off, this might actually be a treat. The wealthy Victorians parade down to the fishmonger for fresh trout, gleaming cuts of salmon, and, if they're feeling especially pious, maybe a bit of lobster, as if God personally blessed crustaceans for high society. Their tables are set with gleaming silver, sauceboats of hollandaise, and a display of aquatic decadence designed to make the poor contemplate both mortality and class struggle. But if you're like most Victorians, scraping by, counting farthings, and avoiding eye contact with your landlord, your fish is less of a delicacy and more of an endurance test. You approach the fish stall and are met with a pungent wall of aroma that's equal parts ocean breeze, low tide, and existential dread. Here you find the holy trinity of the poor man's Friday: salted herring, dried cod, or, if you're very unlucky, barrel, aged mackerel. Salted fish is the original tough love. It's preserved within an inch of its life, requiring a full afternoon soak just to be chewable. Your grandmother swears by the old ways. It's better if you boil it in milk, which frankly just changes the texture from roofing shingle to wet boot. Every bite squeaks between your teeth, and the flavor is best described as ocean, with notes of regret and panic. Occasionally you get a bony surprise, and now you have to explain to your dentist that yes, you did chip your tooth on a spiritual obligation. Then there's smoked fish, kippers, usually, permeating your clothes, your kitchen, and your future. The smell is so aggressive you start wondering if it's possible to be haunted by breakfast. If you're lucky, your fish is mostly edible. If not, you can always barter it to the cat, who is wise enough to sniff it and walk away. The truly desperate try their hand at eels, which are not only slippery when alive, but deeply suspicious when dead. Eels are cheap, abundant, and usually turn up as pies, stews, or simply boiled until they lose the will to exist. You poke at a quivering mound of jellied eel, hoping it doesn't poke back. Victorians swore by their restorative properties, but modern science would call it culinary Stockholm syndrome. What about the market's famous fresh fish? Let's just say fresh is a relative term. The fish on Friday has typically had a long week too. Netted on Monday, left on ice sometimes, and rotated daily until someone brave enough buys it. By the time it lands on your plate, it's gone through so many transformations it deserves its own biography. If you're really down on your luck, there's always fish bones boiled for broth, stretching flavor and imagination to the breaking point. A good Friday fish soup contains whatever was swept off the slab at the end of the day, bits of fin, tail, and hope all simmered together until nutritious and identifiable part ways. And yet, for all the jokes, Friday fish is a tradition, a pause in the monotony, a connection to centuries of faith, famine, and frugality. You scrape your plate, say your prayers, and count yourself lucky. You survived another Friday, your teeth mostly intact, your spirit only slightly dented, and a vague promise of something better for supper tomorrow. Dinner is served, and it's boiled cabbage. Again. The smell has a way of permeating everything, including your soul. Victorians believed boiling vegetables made them healthy, which is true if you define healthy as impossible to enjoy. You sit at the dinner table and stare at the mound of pale, limp cabbage that's been cooked so thoroughly it's lost all hope and most of its vitamins. This is not a side dish. This is the main event, the star attraction, the thing that will haunt your dreams. You breathe in and immediately regret it. The aroma is not just in the kitchen, it's in the wallpaper, your clothes, your hair, and possibly the very fabric of time. Let's be honest. In Victorian England, cabbage is both a vegetable and a lifestyle. Potatoes and carrots might come and go with the seasons, but cabbage is forever. It's affordable, hearty, and, when boiled for just the right, red, excessive, length of time, becomes both food and air freshener, assuming your goal is to freshen the air with the scent of post-industrial despair. Boiling is the Victorian answer to every vegetable problem. Got a beetroot? Boil it. An old carrot? Boil it. Found something green and leafy in the garden? Boil it until it can be sipped through a straw. As you prod the cabbage with your fork, you wonder about its life before this moment. Did it dream of being sautéed? Roasted? Maybe even tucked into a coleslaw? Not here. Here, cabbage only knows the inside of a bubbling pot, and the relentless optimism of the English housewife convinced this will finally be the batch that tastes like something. It never is. The process is simple. Take a whole cabbage, quarter it if you're feeling fancy, drop it into boiling water with a handful of salt, and wait, and wait, and wait. Victorian recipes promise cabbage is done when it yields to the spoon, but by the time dinner is served, it's yielding to gravity. The color transforms from vibrant green to a lifeless beige that blends in with the wallpaper and, if you're not careful, the family dog. It's soft enough to eat without teeth, useful, since a steady diet of boiled cabbage and questionable bread means you probably don't have many left. The taste? Imagine hot water that once met a cabbage in passing, now strained through a wet wool sock. If you're lucky, there might be a knob of butter melting somewhere in the folds, but mostly it's just salty, vegetal, and aggressively bland. Some families add vinegar for flavor, which just makes the whole affair taste like disappointment with a hint of pickling accident. But wait, there's more. Boiled cabbage is not content to exist only in the moment. No, it lingers. Hours after dinner, your home is still full of that ghostly aroma, creeping into the bedroom and whispering, "Remember me?" Even the neighbors know when you've had cabbage for dinner. Dogs howl, children hide, and somewhere, Queen Victoria herself probably wrinkles her nose. Despite all this, cabbage is considered a superfood of its day. Full of vitamins, before you boiled them to death, cheap, and said to fortify the constitution, presumably because eating it regularly builds character, or at least lowers your expectations for life's pleasures. The Victorians believed that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and boiled cabbage is proof of that philosophy in edible form. So you chew, you swallow, and you give thanks for the privilege of another meal, even if your taste buds have signed a petition for early retirement. You scrape your plate, already bracing yourself for tomorrow's leftovers. Because in Victorian England, dinner is less about nourishment and more about endurance. And if you ever wondered what it's like to eat a vegetable and then wear it as a perfume, boiled cabbage has you covered, literally. Stew is the Victorian version of empty the fridge. It's meat, vegetables, and whatever's about to rot, simmered until it all tastes the same. If you can't identify something in your bowl, just assume it's edible and keep chewing. It's evening in a cramped Victorian home, the kind with wallpaper that's seen better centuries. The entire family gathers around a chipped, bubbling pot, noses filled with the rich, ambiguous scent of stew. This is not a recipe so much as a tradition, a ritual of resourcefulness and lowered expectations. In a world before food waste was a trendy hashtag, stew night was a simple rule. Use everything, question nothing, hope for the best. The stew itself is a mystery, sometimes in a comforting way, sometimes in a way that makes you glance around for the nearest exit. Into the pot goes yesterday's beef bone, a heel of stale bread, a carrot that's more theory than vegetable, and potatoes with opinions about when they should have been eaten. If you're lucky, a bit of leftover meat finds its way in. Usually so well boiled it now exists in a quantum state between shredded and dissolved. Victorian cooks are masters of camouflage. If it once grew, walked, or merely existed in the general vicinity of a garden, it's fair game for the pot. Cabbage, turnip, parsnip, if you can name it, congratulations. You've got better eyes than most. Some stew recipes even call for dumplings, which are basically lumps of flour and water intended to fill you up, distract you from the more troubling contents, and mop up every drop of the mysterious broth. The flavour profile of Victorian stew is a subtle mix of everything plus time. It simmers for hours, sometimes days, each reheating, blending the flavours further, until what started as a faint memory of beef is now just brown. Herbs and spices, if they appear at all, are so faint you'd need a microscope and a vivid imagination to detect them. Salt is precious, pepper is a fantasy, and the only real seasoning is the vague panic that comes with chewing something with a questionable texture. You ladle the stew into battered bowls and brace yourself for the first bite. There's a piece of gristle that's been making the rounds since Tuesday, a chunk of bread valiantly holding its shape, and a floating green thing that's either a pea or a survivor from last week's salad. Every mouthful is a surprise, some pleasant, some alarming, all filling. You chew thoughtfully, pretending you can't taste the faint metallic tang that suggests the pot is as old as the house. Conversation at stew night is its own tradition. Someone always asks, "What's in this?" and everyone else politely ignores them. If it's a special occasion, say, you found a penny on the street, there might be a bone with a little marrow left. Children fish around their bowls, looking for treasures and hoping for meat. More often, you just keep your head down, chew quietly, and imagine you're eating something truly luxurious, like a potato that's still firm. For dessert, there's hope, and possibly bread crusts with a scrape of jam if it's payday. The pot is scraped clean, every last drop saved for tomorrow's batch. Nothing is wasted, except, perhaps, your desire for culinary excitement. When the meal is done, you lean back, stomach pleasantly heavy, taste buds gently numbed. You've survived another stew night, the culinary equivalent of rolling the dice and betting on your immune system. Is it gourmet? No. Is it nutritious? Arguably. Does it fill you up and bring the family together, united in confusion and gratitude? Absolutely. Because in Victorian England, stew isn't just food, it's a lesson in thrift, patience, and the fine art of not asking too many questions. Sugar becomes the new status symbol. You're handed cakes, puddings, and candies at every turn. Kids run wild on a sugar rush. Dentists buy second homes. And everyone pretends not to notice their teeth slowly turning into powder. Let's set the scene. You're in a bustling Victorian home, or maybe a parlour that's been taken over by lace doilies and the distant threat of a piano recital. At the centre of the room is a glittering table of temptation, plates piled with spongy cakes, towers of meringue, and bowls overflowing with pastel candies that promise joy and, eventually, a dentist's intervention. Sugar, once an impossible luxury, is now a sign that you've made it. The more you pile onto your plate, the more your neighbours are forced to confront their own lack of molar coverage. It wasn't always this way. Sugar used to be a rare, exotic thing, imported from distant colonies, locked away in cupboards, and reserved for special occasions like royal weddings or the day someone finally invented the cardigan. But by the mid-1800s, new trade routes and questionable labour practices meant sugar poured into Britain like rain through a leaky roof. Suddenly, even the local grocer was stocking cubes, loaves, and glittering bags of the stuff. The nation's sweet tooth erupted overnight, and so did its dental crises. You can't escape the onslaught of sweets. Everywhere you go, someone's trying to press a slab of cake into your hand, usually slathered with icing thick enough to qualify as building insulation. There's Victoria sponge, layers of jam, cream, and enough sugar to guarantee you'll be awake until next Tuesday. There are puddings in every shape and colour, sometimes set alight at the table, sometimes so dense they bend your spoon and your will to live. Even the most innocent-seeming tart is likely hiding a core of boiled condensed milk, treacle, or mysterious jam. Children, of course, are the real casualties and the real beneficiaries of the sugar boom. Penny sweets line every corner shop, sticks of bright pink rock candy, licorice wheels, barley sugar twists, and humbugs so tough they could be used as currency in an emergency. Kids hoard their sweets like dragons, pockets bulging, teeth gently dissolving with every glorious chew. Every school break ends in a sugar-fueled stampede, followed by a long, philosophical debate about whether one can actually die of toffee overdose. Dentists, meanwhile, become the unsung heroes, or villains, of the Victorian era. They rub their hands in glee as patients stream in, clutching jaws and begging for mercy. The drill, if you're unlucky enough to encounter it, is operated by foot pedal and designed more for psychological warfare than precision. Anesthetics are a work in progress. Sometimes you just get a glass of brandy and a hearty pat on the back before the extraction begins. Tooth powder and dubious homemade pastes are peddled by every apothecary, but prevention is a losing battle against the daily avalanche of sugary delights. And yet, no one can stop. Sugar is fashionable. Sugar is modern. If you decline a slice of cake, you're viewed with deep suspicion, possibly a revolutionary, possibly French. Even the poorest households will scrape together a few pennies for boiled sweets, if only to show they haven't given up hope or taste buds. Every social event, from weddings to funerals to Tuesday afternoon, features at least one dessert course designed to both impress and incapacitate. The result? By the time you're 30, your mouth resembles a haunted house. Smiles are rarer, but never the sweets themselves. Still, no one regrets it. The joy of a sticky pudding or a freshly opened jar of raspberry jam outweighs the threat of imminent dental collapse. You finish your third slice of cake. Try to ignore the dull ache in your gums and tell yourself it's worth it. Because in Victorian England, you are what you eat, and apparently you're about 60% sugar and 40% poor life choices. You're invited to an upper-class dinner. There are more forks than foods you recognize, and the meal takes 4 hours. You nod politely while secretly praying for the invention of pizza delivery. Let's start at the door. The butler greets you with the solemnity of a minor cathedral and a look that suggests he could recite your entire ancestry just by the way you hold your hat. You're ushered into the drawing room, where you try to blend in with the wallpaper while desperately rehearsing which fork to use for what. The air is thick with the scent of flowers, beeswax, and the faint panic of hungry guests who know the first course is still at least 45 minutes away. When the dinner gong finally booms, it's less an invitation and more a call to arms. You file into a dining room where the table gleams with enough silverware to stage a small battle. Every place setting is an archaeological dig of utensils. Fish forks, soup spoons, bone marrow scoops, asparagus tongs, each with a specific purpose and a terrifying etiquette attached. You pretend to know what you're doing, watching your neighbor for cues while vowing to just use your hands if things get desperate. The meal itself is a procession of tiny, elaborately named courses. First, an amuse-bouche, a single bite of something so delicate you're not sure if you should eat it or frame it. Then, soup, always tepid, served in a bowl so shallow it doubles as a saucer. Next comes the fish, a creation with more bones than actual meat and a sauce that tastes faintly of regret. You tackle it with your third fork and hope for the best. By course 3, conversation is in full swing. The topics? The weather, of course, then horses, the possibility of rain, and occasionally the scandalous story of Cousin Reginald's latest hat. You're careful not to laugh too loudly, or at all, and you nod at the right moments, desperately hoping you're not agreeing to support a bill in Parliament or join a fox hunt at dawn. The main course arrives, roast beef or mutton, carved with surgical precision by the master of the house, who's spent years preparing for this moment. It comes with vegetables arranged in geometric patterns and potatoes sculpted to resemble the Duke of Wellington. You're still hungry, but you know the rules. Never ask for seconds until the hostess blinks twice and the footman nods thrice. This may never happen. More courses follow. A sorbet to cleanse the palate. Code for don't get too excited. We're only halfway done. Then game birds, or a joint of lamb, which you try not to overanalyze for bullet wounds. Finally, a cheese plate arrives, stacked with slabs of cheddar hard enough to use as roof tiles and blue cheese that might qualify for citizenship in its own right. And let's not forget the pudding course. Here comes a moulded jelly wobbling with intent, a trifle that's seen better days, and a custard so rich it could probably pay your rent. You take a modest portion and wonder if there's any chance someone will sneak you a slice of bread on the side. Throughout the evening, a fleet of servants hovers, refilling glasses, whisking away empty plates, and silently judging your every move. The conversation turns to travel, poetry, and the virtues of cold baths. You contemplate your own mortality, and the fact that you'd trade half your inheritance for a hot sausage roll and a quiet corner. After 4 hours, dinner is declared a success. You're full, but only of anxiety and starch. The ordeal ends with a glass of port, a polite bow, and the realization that you've survived a Victorian upper-class dinner, exhausted, over-forked, and already planning your next meal, preferably one you can eat with your hands. Welcome to dinner, where every bite is a potential social disaster. You can't start until the hostess does, can't eat peas with a knife, and can't admit you have no idea what half these foods are. Manners matter more than survival. The table is set, and the stakes are higher than the aspic. As you slide into your chair, never drag, always slide, you're instantly hit by a wave of rules, each one as essential as the next. Napkin on your lap, back straight, elbows in, and whatever you do, don't touch the bread until the host gives the signal, or until you pass out from hunger, whichever comes first. You scan the battlefield in front of you. Forks, knives, spoons, and at least 3 unidentifiable utensils that look like they could double as surgical instruments. There's a fish fork, a dessert fork, a fork for removing that one vegetable you hate, and a spoon so tiny you're not sure if it's for salt or for scooping up your dignity. The Victorian dinner table is a minefield for the unprepared. The first challenge arrives in the form of soup. Easy, right? Not so fast. The correct approach is to spoon the soup away from you so you don't splash your lap. Sip quietly from the side of the spoon and never, Under any circumstances, slurp. If the soup is tepid, which it will be, congratulations, that's just how it's supposed to be. If it's hot, try to hide your pain behind a polite smile. Whatever happens, do not blow on it. Victorian etiquette dictates that suffering is always private. Next come the vegetables, presented in geometric arrangements designed by someone with a deep mistrust of chaos. You can't stab them, shovel them, or, God forbid, cut them with your knife. Peas are a particular hazard. The proper technique is to carefully balance them on the back of your fork, an act requiring years of practice, nerves of steel, and possibly a background in circus arts. Any peas that escape must be discreetly ignored, as chasing food around your plate is strictly forbidden. There is no 5-second rule in polite society. Then there's the bread. It sits beside your plate, quietly taunting you. You must break it with your fingers, never cut it, and butter only the piece you're about to eat. To butter an entire slice at once is to reveal yourself as a barbarian, and you may as well excuse yourself from society altogether. As the courses parade by, fish, meat, mysterious jelly molded into the shape of despair, you must never begin eating until the hostess has raised her fork. Conversation is encouraged, but only if it remains firmly above the waistline. No talk of illness, no mention of food poisoning, and certainly no reference to last week's unfortunate trout incident. Topics should be light: the weather, the Queen's latest fashion, or perhaps the moral superiority of boiled cabbage. If you must excuse yourself from the table, do so silently, with a subtle nod, leaving your napkin never crumpled on your chair. Return quietly, resume your position, and pretend you didn't just sprint down the hall in search of fresh air. Dessert brings new perils. How to eat pudding with both dignity and a spoon that bends under pressure. How to navigate the cheese course without accidentally committing a diplomatic incident with the blue Stilton. Every gesture, every bite is a test. Drop a fork, try to recover gracefully, or just quietly disappear from society. By the end of the meal, your nerves are as frayed as your waistcoat. You survived, but only just. In Victorian England, dining isn't just about eating. It's about proving you can do so while performing the most delicate ballet of manners known to humanity. You rise from the table, exhausted and still hungry, but certain of one thing. Next time, you'll be dining alone, with your hands in the dark. Desperate for a hot meal, you find yourself at a soup kitchen. The soup is suspiciously thin, the bread even thinner. But it's hot, it's free, and nobody asks questions about what's floating in the broth. Welcome to the safety net of Victorian Britain, a place where hope comes ladled in a tin bowl and dignity is politely left at the door. The penny dinner and the soup kitchen are the last refuge for the hungry, the homeless, the jobless, and anyone who's recently lost a battle with the economic system. They're open to all, but they're especially popular during the endless grey drizzle of an English winter, when a free meal feels like the only thing standing between you and joining the local population of decorative lamppost statues. The line forms early. Some people arrive before dawn, clutching battered mugs or chipped plates and the faintest hope for a second helping. Everyone's dressed in their finest patched coats and layers of fashionably invisible clothing, all in the universal colour palette of Victorian poverty: grey, brown, and whatever shade the London fog feels like providing that day. Once you finally reach the door, you're greeted not by a smiling host but by a stern matron who's seen too much to be impressed by gratitude. She hands you a bowl of soup that's about 3 molecules away from being called hot water with attitude. The ingredients are a closely guarded secret, but if you listen closely, you might hear someone whisper, turnip, barley, old boot. There are vegetables in there, but they've been cooked into an unrecognizable mush. Sometimes there's a floating speck of something green. Don't stare at it, or it might stare back. The bread comes next. It's a sliver, a suggestion, an abstract concept of bread. Stale, thin, and hard enough to double as a defensive weapon, it's the perfect accompaniment to the soup's existential crisis. Still, You break it into the bowl, let it soak, and imagine you're at a fashionable French bistro instead of sharing a bench with someone arguing gently with their shoes. As you eat, the noise in the room is a steady background hum, spoons clinking, coughs echoing, and the soft, shared silence of people pretending they don't notice the smell. The soup kitchen is a place where conversation is rationed. No one asks, "What's in this?" and no one answers, "You don't want to know." The main rule is, just be grateful. Gratitude, like salt, is always in short supply but somehow makes everything a bit more bearable. The clientele is a mix of the city's survivors, widows, orphans, out-of-work labourers, ex-soldiers, and the occasional middle-class clerk who fell through society's cracks. Everyone is united by one thing, hunger, and by the time you reach the bottom of your bowl, you're convinced you could eat 3 more. But seconds are rare, and you don't want to get a reputation for being greedy. Instead, you thank the volunteers and shuffle back into the cold, a little warmer inside and a lot less picky about the definition of food. Despite its flaws, the soup kitchen is a small miracle. It's proof that even in a city famous for its indifference, someone cares enough to stir a pot, slice a loaf, and provide a hot meal to those who need it most. Sure, the meal might leave you wondering if you've just eaten your first serving of invisible meat, but it keeps you going for another day, and that's what really matters. You head out into the fog, belly full, enough, spirit patched together, and ready to face whatever tomorrow's dinner, mysterious or not, has in store. After all, in Victorian England, even charity comes with a side of adventure. You try to improve your meal with a splash of ketchup, but it's nothing like today's ketchup. More likely it's fermented, spicy, and makes you question every decision that led you to this table. Let's talk about flavour in the Victorian era. It's less about enhancing your food and more about mounting a last-ditch rescue operation. No matter what's on your plate, cold mutton, stringy beef, or that infamous boiled cabbage, you have one secret weapon: condiments. But before you get excited, remember, this isn't a world of neatly squeezed Heinz bottles and gentle supermarket relishes. Victorian condiments are wild, unruly, and prone to giving your taste buds a mild existential crisis. Take ketchup, for example. The Victorians loved their ketchup, so much so they made it out of nearly anything except tomatoes. Walnut ketchup? Absolutely. Mushroom ketchup? Of course. Anchovy ketchup? Tragically, yes. Tomato ketchup did exist, but it was considered a bit avant-garde and almost suspiciously American. Whatever the flavour, the process was basically the same. Find an ingredient, add vinegar, add a heroic amount of salt and spice, and then let the whole mess ferment for a few weeks until it had enough personality to bite back. The result was a sauce that could wake the dead and strip the paint off a sideboard. Victorian ketchups were thin, punchy, and so vinegary that your tongue might shrivel before it ever tastes the meat. If you're used to the sweet, mellow ketchup of today, this stuff is like licking a pickled thunderstorm. Victorians poured it on everything. Meats, pies, even soups. Anywhere the taste of food needed to be distracted from its natural state. Then there's mustard, the original daredevil of the condiment world. Victorian mustard was not for the faint of heart. It came as a powder or a lurid yellow paste, packed with enough heat to clear your sinuses and your conscience. A dab on your beef could add a little excitement, or, if you were heavy-handed, create an out-of-body experience that left you contemplating the meaning of life. If someone started sneezing at the table, you'd know the mustard had done its job. Pickles were another favourite. Cucumbers, onions, walnuts, even eggs, all bobbing in mysterious brine. A Victorian pickle jar was less a snack and more a chemistry experiment, sometimes containing things you'd struggle to identify even under a microscope. They were sharp, sour, and often alarmingly crunchy, bringing much-needed zing to meals otherwise dominated by the flavour beige. And don't forget the chutneys. Sweet, spicy, often chunky enough to need a fork. Chutney was Victorian Britain's way of pretending they understood Indian cuisine. with results that were sometimes delicious and sometimes just confusing. Vinegar itself deserves its own moment of reverence. There was always a bottle of it on the table, ready to be splashed on chips, drizzled on cold cuts, or used to douse anything that looked suspicious. Some Victorians swore by malt vinegar, others by cider or wine vinegar, and a few brave souls would even mix their own. If your dinner wasn't tangy enough to make your cheeks ache, you simply weren't doing it right. Of course, not all condiments were edible. Enter sauce picante, fish sauce, and the infamous gentleman's relish, a spreadable anchovy paste with a flavor profile that could politely be described as divisive. Slathered on toast or mixed into gravy, it was a culinary dare that separated the truly British from everyone else. In the end, Victorian condiments were less about making good food taste better, and more about making any food taste like anything, other than what it actually was. Every meal was a negotiation. Can I mask this flavor? Can I survive this aftertaste? And is it really supposed to burn like that? You take a bite, reach for the vinegar, and resign yourself to the tangy, spicy, mysterious world of Victorian seasoning, where the only thing you can count on is that everything will, somehow, taste like vinegar. Cheese in Victorian times was not for the faint of heart. It was hard, pungent, and sometimes still moving. Cutting the cheese was both a culinary act and a warning. Let's set the scene. You sit down at a Victorian supper, and someone, with great ceremony, unveils a wheel of local cheese. The room grows quiet, not out of respect, but out of caution. The cheese glistens slightly, sending out a whiff so powerful you begin to question if you've just stepped into a barn or the beginning of a minor medical emergency. Everyone leans in, fascinated and afraid. Victorian cheese is a world away from the tidy, plastic-wrapped slices of modern supermarkets. These are big, burly wheels of mystery, often aged in cellars so damp and dark that they qualify as part of the local ecosystem. Sometimes a rind forms so tough it could be used as a replacement for missing roof tiles. The inner cheese, when revealed, can be anything from crumbly and mild to so pungent that it feels like it's kicking back. Blue veins? That's not a design choice. That's what happens when you store your cheese next to last month's turnips and hope for the best. There's cheddar, yes, the famous one. But the Victorian variety is sharper, crumblier, and possibly made by people who considered dental pain a rite of passage. There's Stilton, that proud blue cheese that arrives at the table, trailing a scent that can clear a room, and then the local farmhouse cheeses, unnamed and, frankly, unclassifiable. Sometimes, a brave soul attempts to cut a slice and is met with resistance. This cheese bites back. Some cheeses are so hard you need a hammer and chisel. Others have reached that delicate stage of ripeness known to scientists as actively evolving. If your cheese wiggles when you cut it, it's probably best to just nod and try to eat quickly before it gets away. There are tales, some true, some exaggerated for effect, of Victorian cheeses so lively that you'd swear they were planning their own escape. And yet, cheese was an absolute staple. It could be grated over gruel, slapped between two pieces of suspect bread, or nibbled as a late-night snack for anyone brave enough to face it in the dark. In a world without refrigeration, the trick was not making cheese that was fresh, but cheese that could survive weeks of travel, months of questionable storage, and several generations of mice. And survive it did, sometimes outlasting the very people who made it. Pairings? Bread, obviously, but also apples, onions, and sometimes a pint of something strong enough to drown out the flavour. For the gentry, cheese was a proud finish to a long meal, a board laid out with slabs and wedges, served with port, and always accompanied by gentle hints to avoid the especially green bit on the end. For the poor, it was a meal in itself, a chunk of cheese, a heel of bread, and hope that the cheese had more protein than whatever the bread was hiding. Of course, cheese was not immune to Victorian culinary creativity. Enter the toasted cheese, a dish in which a slice is placed on bread and heated until it melts, or at least softens enough to pretend. or cheese pudding, a concoction best left to those who like their dairy products aggressively mysterious. And so you eat, savoring the unique thrill of not knowing if you're consuming dinner or being watched by it. Victorian cheese, a true test of courage, palate, and dental durability. You finish your slice, feel your gums tingle, and offer a silent thank you to the cheesemakers of history, whose love of strong flavors, questionable storage, and lively textures has given you a story to tell, and possibly a mild case of the jitters. Milk isn't pasteurized, which means it's a race against time every morning. If it smells okay, you drink it. If not, you put it in your tea and hope for the best. Victorians had strong stomachs, mostly because they had to. It's early in the morning, and the milkman is making his rounds. His cart creaks down the street, the churn sloshes, and he's got that look in his eye that says, "Ask no questions and I'll tell you no lies." The milk, delivered in open pails, is ladled into your jug at the door. No seals, no safety checks, just a firm handshake and mutual understanding that what you're getting is, at best, a suggestion of freshness. You rush the milk inside, knowing that in Victorian England, time is not on your side. There's no refrigeration, so milk is a ticking time bomb, measured not in days but in hours. If the weather's cool, you might get away with pouring yourself a creamy glass. If it's hot, all bets are off. By lunchtime, what was once fresh is now ambitious. And by evening, it's probably lobbying for a place in the cheese segment. The daily ritual is as follows. Give the milk a tentative sniff, squint at the surface, and decide what level of risk you're prepared to take. Sometimes it's fine, and you marvel at your good fortune. Other times, it's a bit sour, but that's what strong tea is for. A little off milk just adds body and character. If the milk has developed lumps, a blue sheen, or starts to fizz on its own, it's time to get creative. The truly brave will still pour it over porridge, hoping the oats don't notice. Milk is, for many Victorians, both luxury and gamble. The wealthy might have a cow of their own, tended in the backyard by someone with more experience than common sense. For everyone else, it's whatever the milkman brings, and you hope he didn't stop for tea, errands, or a chat with Mrs. Pratt. Biggs at number 23, who is famous for paying in buttons and delaying the entire block. Then there's the small matter of milk adulteration. The Victorian era is the golden age of creative food additives. It's not uncommon for milk to be watered down, whitened with chalk, or thickened with a little flour if it's feeling runny. Sometimes, you might find a surprise or two floating on the surface. Best to fish it out with a spoon and move on. If the colour is off, just call it country style and act like you meant it. If the milk does go off, nothing is wasted. It's whipped into puddings, baked into cakes, or curdled into a soft cheese that's more desperation than dairy. Recipes for sour milk abound. Clotted cream if you're fancy, buttermilk scones if you're hopeful, and milk punch if you've truly given up. In a pinch, sour milk is used to shine shoes or feed the family cat, who, in a display of true Victorian fortitude, will drink just about anything. And yet, somehow, everyone survives. Children are raised on a steady diet of questionable milk, often mixed with water so dubious you're not sure which ingredient is the bigger risk. Stomachs adapt, expectations lower, and the phrase "it builds character" takes on new meaning. The result? An entire generation that can handle anything breakfast throws at them, up to and including the occasional spoonful of blue-tinged mystery. So you take your tea, add a dash of milk, and raise your cup to Victorian resilience, the kind that can stomach whatever's in the jug and still ask for seconds. In this era, fresh milk is a blessing, sour milk is a challenge, and suspiciously blue milk? Well, that's just Tuesday. Food safety laws are still in their awkward teenage years. Everything is suspect. Bread has chalk, tea has twigs, sweets have arsenic. The phrase "eat at your own risk" is less a warning and more of a lifestyle. Welcome to Victorian England, where every meal is a thrilling game of guess that ingredient. It's a world where dinner isn't just nourishment, it's a test of luck, genetics, and how much you trust your local grocer. There's no FDA, no health inspectors, just you, your stomach, and the hope that whatever you eat won't glow in the dark or start moving on its own. Let's start with the bread. The loaf looks respectable enough, but that white color didn't come from pure wheat flour. No, it's been helpfully improved with a bit of ground chalk or alum, crunchy, yes, but wonderfully shelf-stable. Each bite is not only a meal but also a calcium supplement. If you find yourself with a mouthful of grit, just tell yourself it's artisanal. Next, you reach for the tea, your one daily comfort, brewed lovingly in a chipped pot. But tea isn't just tea. It's tea leaves, mixed with a generous helping of twigs, dried leaves, and whatever the shopkeeper swept up that morning. If you spot a green tint, congratulations, it's been coloured with copper sulfate for that extra Victorian zest. Sometimes, bits of sawdust or even old sheep droppings sneak into the blend. Don't bother complaining, the person selling it probably can't tell the difference either. Sugar is, of course, everywhere, but so is the risk. Victorian sugar is sometimes whitened with bone char or laced with sand. It's crunchy in all the wrong ways and probably explains why you could power a small steam engine just by grinding your teeth together after dessert. The world of sweets is a minefield, literally. Confectioners compete to make the most eye-catching candies, and if that means a little arsenic or mercury for colour, so be it. Children suck on green apple drops, blissfully unaware they're working their way through a microdose of poison. Red candies might get their colour from lead oxide, which adds a certain je ne sais quoi, specifically, why is my tongue numb? But the colours are so pretty, and no one's heard of the word toxic yet. Milk, as you've already discovered, is liable to be stretched with water, and that water might have been borrowed straight from the Thames. If the milk looks too thin, a dash of chalk or flour does the trick. The result is a beverage with the nutritional value of wallpaper paste, and, if you're unlucky, the taste to match. Spices are no safer. Cayenne pepper is bulked out with brick dust, black pepper with crushed seeds and random bits of charcoal. Mustard gets its signature colour from turmeric, or occasionally yellow ochre, because nothing says healthy appetite like a little hint of industrial pigment. Even beer, that last refuge for the weary worker, is suspect. Brewers add everything from strychnine to sawdust to make it foamy, preserve it longer, or simply because they're feeling experimental. A night out at the pub is less relax and unwind, and more roll the dice with your liver. All this doesn't mean Victorians just gave up on eating, they simply adapted. People developed favourite shops and secret tests for quality. Does the bread bounce? Is the milk blue? Is your sweet shop still in business after last week's funeral? The newspapers published scandal after scandal, leading eventually to the first timid steps toward food regulation, but until then, every meal was a suspense novel in 3 courses. So you pick up your fork, eye your plate, and take a cautious bite, knowing full well that you might be ingesting a periodic table of surprises. In Victorian England, eating isn't just survival, it's an adventure, a gamble, and a minor act of bravery. It's lunchtime in the factory, and you pull out a cold mutton sandwich. The bread is stale, the meat is older, and your main concern is whether you'll chip a tooth or catch something unpronounceable. Let's set the scene. It's the middle of a 12-hour shift in a Victorian mill, factory, or foundry. Your hands are already covered in a fine dusting of soot, flour, or industrial mystery. The air is a mix of clanging machinery, distant shouts, and the ever-present soundtrack of your own rumbling stomach. As the lunch bell rings, you join a ragtag parade of co-workers, shuffling to the least drafty corner, all clutching battered tin pails or tightly wrapped bundles. Today's meal deals, Victorian edition. You unwrap your lunch with cautious optimism. Today's offering, a cold mutton sandwich. Mutton, the meat of sheep who've lived long, full, and sometimes questionable lives. By the time most Victorian families can afford mutton, the sheep has already retired, written its memoirs, and possibly started a second career. What's left is sliced thin, and sandwiched between two hunks of bread that double as personal defense equipment. You take a bite and brace yourself. The bread is stale. So stale, in fact, that you contemplate using it as a makeshift hammer for your next shift. The meat inside is gamey, chewy, and cold. Aged to perfection, some might say. On its last legs, you think. There's a layer of fat that's been reconstituted by the ambient temperature of your coat pocket, and a hint of mustard or pickle if you're lucky, or if you've got connections in the kitchen at home. Eating in the Victorian workplace is as much a social event as it is a culinary test of endurance. Everyone has their own version of the same sandwich. Beef if you're lucky, ham if you know someone, cheese if you're feeling thrifty, or just bread and a thin swipe of dripping if you're on hard times. There's always someone with a suspiciously fresh-looking apple, closely guarded like a family secret. The lucky ones, usually foremen or clerks, have a sliver of cake or a piece of pie, which they eat with exaggerated casualness and a side order of smugness. Lunch is brief, practical, and rarely relaxing. You eat sitting on crates, in stairwells, or, if you're really unlucky, perched next to the machinery itself. There's no such thing as a break room, unless you count the alley behind the building, with its signature blend of coal dust and questionable puddles. Some workers swap sandwiches, more out of hope than strategy. If you're feeling especially daring, you trade a crust of bread for a bit of someone's pickled onion, only to realize you've made a terrible mistake, and now your breath could clear the factory floor. Hydration is another adventure. The water jug is communal, the tin cup is passed around, and every sip is a roll of the dice. If you're feeling flush, you might have a penny for a mug of weak tea from the nearby stall, or even, scandal of scandals, a small tot of beer to steady your nerves before the next round of riveting, weaving, or endless paperwork. As the lunch bell tolls, everyone wraps up the remains of their sandwiches and stows them away for another day. Crumbs are brushed off, jaws are tested for mobility, and you mentally prepare for the long afternoon ahead. The cold mutton sandwich may not be glamorous, but it's fuel. And in the Victorian workplace, fuel is all that matters. You return to your station, satiated, if not satisfied, and silently vow to someday invent the thermos, the refrigerator, or, failing that, just better bread. Because in Victorian England, lunch isn't just about what you eat. It's about surviving the afternoon and living to chew another day. Water isn't always safe, so everyone drinks alcohol. Gin is the drink of choice for the desperate, beer for the working man, and nobody trusts the water unless it's been boiled or blessed by a priest. Let's set the scene. It's breakfast in Victorian England. The sun is rising over a smoky cityscape, and the first sound you hear isn't the cheerful kettle whistling, it's the thunk of a bottle on the table. Before you judge, remember, in a world where your tap water could come with a side of cholera, a splash of gin or beer is often considered the sensible choice. Cheers to public health. Gin, in particular, has a notorious reputation. It's the drink of the desperate, the overworked, and those who've given up on tea ever tasting like anything other than dishwater. The city's gin palaces open early, filled with tired men and women chasing a forgetful haze before the day even begins. Mothers, yes, mothers, may dose their infants with a splash of gin in milk, because nothing soothes a teething child like mild intoxication and a questionable grasp of child-rearing best practices. Beer, on the other hand, is the social glue of Victorian society. Children drink it, old ladies drink it, your boss drinks it, and sometimes your boss's horse drinks it, if no one's paying attention. Beer is weak by modern standards, but reliable. It's been boiled, brewed, and handled by enough people that most germs admit defeat. Workers line up at the factory gates with their tin mugs, ready for their morning pint of small beer. It's filling, it's cheap, and, crucially, it's less likely to make you see double before noon. At home, the beer is often homemade, brewed in backyards, basements, or anywhere with enough space to store a mysterious barrel and enough trust to ignore what's floating on top. Recipes are family heirlooms, passed down through generations, each with their own special ingredient, oats, honey, or whatever survived last year's winter. The result is a drink that's sometimes delicious, sometimes suspicious, and always slightly different every batch. The upper classes, of course, like their alcohol refined. Port and sherry flow at dinner parties, and the decanter is passed around with the same gravity as a parliamentary bill. The truly adventurous will sample absinthe or exotic liqueurs, sipping delicately while discussing the finer points of fencing or whether the new cook is French or just putting on airs. For the working man, the local pub is more than just a watering hole. It's the heart of the neighborhood, a sanctuary from the cold, and sometimes the only place you can guarantee a meal that won't try to bite back. Pubs offer beef and beer for a penny, where the beef is suspect but the beer is at least predictable. You might even catch a song, a fight, or the occasional spontaneous game of darts, played with the kind of enthusiasm that suggests no one remembers the rules. Of course, Victorian attitudes to alcohol are complicated. The temperance movement gains steam as the century rolls on, with reformers warning that gin is destroying the very fabric of society, or at least the fabric of trousers on drunkards sleeping in gutters. Posters show sad children, ruined homes, and gin bottles labelled death in the afternoon. Still, for every teetotaler, there's a dozen workers who'd rather trust a pint than a pump. And let's not forget spirits at celebrations. Weddings, wakes, and the occasional Tuesday afternoon all demand a toast. The Victorians raise their glasses to everything. New jobs, old friends, or just surviving another week on bread and boiled cabbage. So, as you sip your morning beer and glance warily at the cloudy water jug, remember, in Victorian England, alcohol is both shield and solace, a daily necessity and a minor act of rebellion. You raise your glass, toast your survival, and hope, just a little, that tomorrow's water will be safe enough to drink, but probably not. Potatoes are everywhere, but they're nothing like the ones you know. They're boiled, overboiled, and then boiled again, just to be sure. Occasionally, they're green and mildly poisonous. Adds excitement to mealtime. Let's step into the Victorian kitchen, where the humble potato reigns as both hero and villain. If bread is the backbone of the working-class diet, the potato is the slightly unpredictable sidekick, always present, rarely appreciated, and occasionally a threat to your well-being. In a world where variety means a different shade of beige, potatoes are the one ingredient everyone can rely on, even if they shouldn't. The typical Victorian potato journey is a lesson in persistence. It starts in the market, where baskets of knobbly, dirt-caked tubers are sold by the pound, the bushel, or, for the desperate, whatever you can fit into your hat. You select your haul, paying special attention to avoid the greenish ones, a challenge, since half the crop seems to be auditioning for a role in a science fiction film. Green potatoes, as any Victorian will warn you, are a bit lively. Translation: mildly poisonous, but not so much that anyone's willing to throw them away. Once home, the potato is subjected to the Victorian art of cooking, which is less about flavour and more about discipline. Boiling is the preferred method, and not just for potatoes. If it stands still, it gets boiled. The instructions are simple. Put potatoes in water, bring to a rolling boil, and then forget about them for an hour while you dash off to mend socks, scold children, or contemplate the meaning of life. The result is a pot of potatoes, so soft they collapse under their own existential dread. On special occasions you might roast or mash them, but these are rare treats, reserved for Sunday roasts, or when the in-laws visit and you need to impress with something more ambitious than slightly less boiled. Roasted potatoes are a marvel, crispy on the outside, if the oven cooperates, and fluffy within. But most Victorians can only dream of such luxury. The rest of the week, it's boiled potatoes, with perhaps a sprinkle of salt or a dab of dripping if you're feeling fancy. The taste? Subtle, let's say. Occasionally earthy, usually bland, and always dependable in its ability to fill your stomach without bringing any real joy. If you get a mouthful that's just a little bitter, congratulations. You've encountered solanine, the chemical in green potatoes that Victorians treat as a mild inconvenience, like rain or existential dread. A few bites won't hurt you, probably. Consider it Victorian Russian roulette, but with more carbs. Potatoes also make appearances in pies, stews, and anything else that needs bulk. Thin soup? Add potatoes. Suspiciously empty pie? Hide it under a layer of mashed potatoes. Unsure if your cheese is still alive? Serve it with potatoes and hope for the best. The potato is the great equalizer, the canvas on which all other flavors, good or bad, are painted. Of course, the potato's real virtue is its availability. Famines loom over Victorian memories, and the Irish potato famine is fresh in the minds of many. Potatoes are cheap, easy to store, and, if you can overlook the occasional toxicity, almost impossible to ruin. Victorians prize them for their reliability, and frankly, their ability to show up day after day, meal after meal, until you forget what a meal without potatoes might even look like. By the end of the meal, you've filled your belly, maybe tested your immune system, and almost certainly lost track of how many potatoes you've eaten this week. You scrape your plate, eye the last lumpy spud, and say a quiet prayer of thanks, or apology, to the humble potato. In Victorian England, every mealtime is a potato lottery, and if you walk away only mildly poisoned, you're ahead of the game. You decide to treat yourself to dinner out. The chop house promises hearty food. In reality, you get a greasy slab of meat, watery gravy, and a side of existential crisis. Welcome to the Victorian chop house, London's answer to fine dining for the masses, or at least for those with a shilling to spare and a digestive system willing to take risks. The outside looks inviting, a swinging sign with a painted steak, the glow of lamplight, the faint sound of someone attempting Chopin on a piano with 3 working keys. Inside, the air is thick with smoke, sweat, and the sweet aroma of nostalgia for meals you've never actually had. You find a seat among a crowd of gentlemen in crumpled suits and factory foremen on a rare night off. The wooden benches are hard, the tables are sticky, and the general decor can be described as dark wood meets early Victorian indifference. A waiter arrives, hair slicked back with equal parts pomade and fatigue, reciting the day's menu, chops, steak, pie, and something ominously called mixed grill. You nod and hope for the best, handing over your coins with a sense of ceremony and a pinch of regret. The meal arrives on a pewter plate with a side of good luck. The chop is generous in size and equally generous in gristle. It glistens with fat, some of it yours, most of it the cow's. The first bite is an adventure in texture. A bit of char, a lot of chew, and a flavor profile that hovers somewhere between smoky and salty surprise. The meat is served with a pool of gravy, more water than substance, with a color best described as Victorian brown. You dip your chop, watch the gravy slide off, and reflect on the mysteries of animal rendering. Alongside the main attraction, you get a potato, boiled, naturally, and as bland as a parliamentary debate on drainage. If you're lucky, there's also a mound of overcooked cabbage, still clinging to the memory of chlorophyll. Occasionally, you get a slab of bread so dense it could be classified as masonry. Everything is washed down with a pint of beer, which is at least cold and honest about its intentions. The chop house is a social experiment as much as a culinary one. At the next table, a pair of clerks debate the merits of coal versus gaslight while fighting over the last bite of kidney pie. A group of dock workers laugh loudly at a joke that may or may not be about the gravy. Someone attempts to order a salad, and the waiter gives them a look of profound Victorian pity before delivering a single leaf of wilted lettuce and a bill for the effort. Atmosphere is part of the experience. The room is loud, the floor is sticky, and the entire establishment vibrates with the energy of men who've spent the whole day working and the whole week thinking about this meal. The chop house is where deals are made, gossip is exchanged, and ambitions are both born and drowned in gravy. There's a sense of camaraderie, a shared acknowledgement that life is hard, meat is rare, and at least no one is serving eel. By the end of your meal, Your hands are greasy, your appetite is tamed, or defeated, and your wallet is lighter. You dab your mouth with a napkin that once dreamed of being linen, finish the last of your beer, and wonder if you'll ever truly know what was in the mixed grill. You step out into the foggy street, full of protein and existential doubt, quietly vowing to stick to home cooking, at least until the next time payday comes around and nostalgia strikes. Because in the Victorian chop house, eating out isn't just about food. It's about taking your chances, making memories, and discovering that sometimes the real flavor was the questionable company you kept along the way. Picnics are all the rage, but the food is mostly bread, cheese, and whatever you can carry without attracting rats. If it rains, you just eat in the drizzle and pretend it's charming. Let's set the scene. It's a rare half-sunny day in the Victorian countryside, and you're headed out for that most fashionable of leisure pursuits, the picnic. A basket is packed, brimming with hopes, dreams, and the overwhelming weight of social expectations. The whole family piles onto a wagon, along with Aunt Mildred, who hasn't enjoyed fresh air since the Crimean War, and Cousin Henry, who's already complaining about mud before you've even left the street. Once you find a likely patch of grass, ideally far from any cows and only slightly upwind of the nearest privy, the blanket is ceremoniously spread on the ground. Immediately, a breeze picks up, launching napkins and hats into the next county. Everyone smiles bravely, as is the custom, and makes a show of brushing off only the largest bugs before sitting down. A gentle drizzle begins, but nobody dares mention it for fear of being labelled difficult. Time for the main event, the food. Victorian picnic baskets are studies in practicality. Forget Instagrammable platters and delicate prosciutto roses. Here, it's hunks of bread, slabs of questionable cheese, and maybe a cold meat pie that spent just enough time in the sun to make you nervous. If you're especially fortunate, someone remembered a jar of pickled onions, which is either a treat or a test of your dental insurance. Cheese, of course, is a wild card. You unwrap it, hopeful for something soft and creamy, only to be met with a pungent, hard wedge that could probably double as a doorstop. The children gnaw on bread, sometimes more intent on building structures than eating them. For dessert, there are jam tarts, likely a little smushed and covered in an even layer of grass and good intentions. No picnic would be complete without the uninvited guests, the local wildlife. Ants are everywhere. They march through your butter, explore your sandwich, and make off with the one decent slice of ham before you can protest. Wasps hover over the ginger beer, and every time you turn your back, a nearby crow eyes the cheese with criminal intent. Victorian etiquette dictates you ignore them all, smile serenely, and keep eating as if you're not locked in mortal combat with the entire insect kingdom. Drinks are simple: homemade lemonade, a flask of weak beer, or, for the truly brave, milk that survived the trip without turning into cheese. You pour yourself a glass, hoping for refreshment and not an impromptu biology lesson. Everyone toasts the lovely weather, even as the rain shifts from drizzle to full-on mist. The sandwiches get soggy, the tart crusts dissolve, and someone, usually Cousin Henry, sneezes loudly and wipes his nose on the last clean napkin. Conversation at a Victorian picnic is half-hearted at best, mostly consisting of remarks about the beauty of the countryside, the resilience of the wasps, and whether the cows in the next field look menacing or merely curious. Games are sometimes attempted: croquet, if there's room, or a rousing round of find the missing fork, but mostly, everyone eats as quickly as possible before the next round of rain. Packing up is a group effort. All leftover bread is divided up, cheese is checked for ant occupation, and anything unclaimed is left as a peace offering to the squirrels. You trudge home, damp, a bit sticky, and humming with the energy of 1,000 bites, both culinary and insect. Because in Victorian England, a picnic is less about the food and more about the performance, showing off your best blanket, your sturdiest teeth, and your ability to eat lunch with dignity while nature does its best to defeat you. And if you can manage all that without accidentally swallowing a beetle, you're already winning. Sunday is special. There's a roast, some potatoes, maybe even gravy if you're lucky. It's the culinary highlight of the week, a brief, delicious reprieve before Monday's cabbage reappears. Let's set the scene. It's Sunday afternoon in Victorian England. The house has been scrubbed, the best china unearthed from beneath a month's worth of newspapers, and the air is full of the mouth-watering aroma of something other than boiling vegetables. The whole family gathers, spirits high, as the promise of roast beef or mutton, maybe even a chicken, if fortune smiled this week, drifts through the parlour. Even the dog is on its best behaviour, lurking under the table, hoping for a miracle. The roast itself is a grand affair. It's been in the oven since breakfast, slowly transforming into something tender, hopefully, and brown, inevitably. Victorian ovens are more wish than science, so evenly cooked is a suggestion rather than a reality. One end is crispy, the other is just this side of raw, and there's always a frantic moment when someone checks for signs of life before carving. Still, it looks impressive, sliced and arranged on a platter, surrounded by potatoes so perfectly roasted that you almost forget how many times you've eaten them this week already. Ah, the potatoes. Unlike their weeknight selves, usually limp and waterlogged, Sunday's potatoes are golden, crispy on the outside, fluffy within, and sometimes even seasoned. They're the highlight for many, hoarded on plates and eyed jealously by siblings and cousins alike. There's a brief, silent negotiation as everyone eyes the serving dish, calculating the odds of a second helping and whether the family pecking order will allow it. And then there's gravy. Not the watery, suspicious liquid that passes for gravy the rest of the week, but something dark, glossy, and genuinely delicious. It's ladled over everything: meat, potatoes, bread, and if you're young or daring, sometimes even over your peas. For one glorious meal, everything tastes like rich, savoury success, and for a fleeting moment, you understand why people put up with boiled cabbage for the other 6 days. Vegetables make an appearance too, usually carrots and parsnips roasted alongside the meat, or peas boiled until just shy of mush. For some reason, there's always one experimental dish: a Yorkshire pudding, a lumpy stuffing, or a suspiciously bright green sauce someone found in a newspaper recipe. Everyone tries it, no one enjoys it, and it quietly disappears after the first round. The table conversation sparkles, at least by Victorian standards. There are cautious jokes, news from church, gossip about neighbours, and whispered negotiations over dessert. Because yes, Sunday dinner means dessert, perhaps a steamed pudding, a jam tart, or the rare and wondrous trifle. The children's eyes widen at the sight of custard or cream, and for a brief moment, all rivalries are forgotten as spoons dig in with wild abandon. But all good things must end. As the plates are cleared, the last crumbs of roast disappear, and everyone leans back, dazed and full. The sense of celebration fades, and is quietly replaced by the grim spectre of Monday's dinner. The return of the cabbage, the reappearance of the stew, and the never-ending potato lottery. The leftover roast is eyed for tomorrow's sandwiches, but you know, deep down it will never taste as good as it did on Sunday. Still, for one meal, you've eaten like royalty, or at least like very optimistic tenants. The ritual, the roast, the anticipation, and yes, even the disappointment, are part of what makes Sunday dinner special. You push back your chair, sigh contentedly, and brace yourself for the long, vegetable-filled week ahead, already counting down the days until Sunday comes around again. You survive another Victorian day, but not unscathed. Food poisoning is common, and the remedies are as bad as the illness. You go to bed hoping tomorrow's food won't fight back. Let's dim the gas lamp and set the mood. You've made it through a long day of questionable meals: chalky bread, blue-tinged milk, and a stew that may or may not have moved under its own power. Now, as you lay in bed with your stomach groaning louder than the street vendors, you begin to ponder: was it the cheese, the pie, or perhaps the fresh fish that's plotting its revenge from within? Victorian food poisoning isn't rare, it's practically a rite of passage. There's a reason every Victorian home has a chamber pot under the bed, and it's not just to save you a midnight trip through the freezing hall. Stomach upsets are a daily hazard, and everyone has their theories about which foods are safe, none, and which ones will go right through you, all of them. Dinner is never just a meal, it's a gamble, and every bite might be your ticket to a long night of regrets. When the symptoms strike, sudden chills, fever, or a gut feeling that something inside is staging a full-scale uprising, Victorian remedies are waiting. First comes the obligatory dose of castor oil, a treatment so vile you start to wonder if the cure is worse than the disease. If that doesn't work, there's always a spot of laudanum, generously prescribed for everything from headaches to existential despair. It will not cure your food poisoning, but you won't care anymore, which, in Victorian logic, is basically the same thing. Other remedies range from creative to mildly alarming. Charcoal biscuits are the health trend of the day, meant to soak up the evil humours in your stomach. If your case is severe, a helpful neighbour might suggest a mustard plaster, applied to the abdomen with all the care of a particularly vengeful school nurse. For children, there's nothing like a hot brick at the foot of the bed and a teaspoon of brandy, because if you can't kill the germs, you might as well knock out the patient. Of course, you're expected to soldier on. Missing work over a little food poisoning? Unthinkable. Victorians pride themselves on their ability to push through any digestive disaster. You'll be up at dawn, clutching your stomach and swearing you'll never eat pickled eggs again, at least until payday, when the promise of a hot meal overrules both memory and common sense. But the real horror is the uncertainty. Was it the stew, the milk, the dubious pie you picked up from the street vendor, who promised it was fresh this morning, governor? You replay your day in reverse, interrogating every crumb and drop. But the truth is, in Victorian England, everything is a suspect. The ghost of food poisoning haunts every kitchen, every workhouse, every fancy dinner table, and every street stall. Sometimes it's quick and merciful. Sometimes it lingers, shadowing you for days as you vow eternal loyalty to toast and weak tea. Yet, through it all, the Victorian stomach is nothing if not resilient. Tomorrow, you'll rise again, queue for your daily bread, and gamble anew with the mysterious contents of your breakfast bowl. Maybe today you'll be lucky. Maybe the milk will only be a little sour. Maybe the cheese won't move. And if not, well, you've survived worse. So as you drift off, stomach rumbling and head spinning with herbal remedies, you offer up a quiet wish to the gods of digestion. May tomorrow's food be edible, may tonight's symptoms be brief, and may you live to face another round of Victorian culinary roulette, sweet dreams, and better luck at breakfast. You open your Victorian pantry hoping for something to liven up dinner. Instead, you find a dusty jar of nutmeg, half a peppercorn, and enough mustard powder to trigger a small riot. Spices are expensive, exotic, and mostly used to disguise the fact that everything you eat is either on its way to spoiling or has already gotten there. You begin to wonder if the real taste of food is just whatever's under the spices. Let's be honest. Victorian food is not winning any flavour contests. Most meals are a parade of beige, brown, and the occasional greenish hue that's as much a warning as a colour. The potato is ever present, the bread is dubious, and the meat has seen better centuries. In such an environment, spices are less a culinary luxury and more a desperate last line of defence. You're not seasoning your dinner. You're mounting a full-scale cover-up. The Victorian spice rack is a testament to hope and wishful thinking. A tin of dried sage that expired around the time of Queen Victoria's coronation. A jar of cloves so pungent it could double as a moth repellent. Pepper is precious, meted out like gold dust. If you manage to get your hands on a whole peppercorn, you guard it with your life and only crack it on birthdays or when the stew seems especially threatening. Nutmeg is another classic, a hard, wrinkled seed that, when grated, provides a whisper of flavour and a powerful reminder that you're still middle class or faking it well. Victorian cooks add nutmeg to everything from rice pudding to mashed potatoes. claiming it brings out the flavor, which is another way of saying distracts you from the taste of mild decay. Mace, cinnamon, and allspice are reserved for special occasions or for families with relatives who write letters home about the exciting flavors of London. But the undisputed king of Victorian kitchen warfare is mustard powder. Cheap, aggressive, and able to clear sinuses at 100 paces, it goes on everything. Meat, bread, cheese, cold potatoes, possibly even boiled cabbage if you're feeling bold. A dab will do, but most Victorians treat a dab as a dare, slathering it on until their eyes water and their regrets set in. The best thing about mustard? It doesn't just mask flavor, it outright destroys it. For a brief, burning moment, you can pretend you're eating something fresh, exciting, or at the very least, still edible. When all else fails, there's vinegar, technically not a spice, but it's doing a lot of heavy lifting in the Victorian flavor department. Vinegar is splashed on chips, doused over cold meats, and stirred into stews with the hope that its sharp tang will chase away any unwanted aromas or evidence of aging. Victorian pantries are filled with bottles of mysterious origin, each promising to turn the bland into the barely bearable. Of course, the spice trade is still a thing of romance and danger. Real cinnamon from Ceylon, pepper from India, even the occasional vanilla pod for those who truly want to show off. But these are rare treats, not for everyday use. Most days, you make do with whatever you can find at the local grocer, who assures you that this brick red powder is absolutely paprika, madam, and definitely not just ground up brick. You try to keep your spirits high. Maybe tonight's stew will be improved by the addition of a bay leaf, which you will of course forget to remove. Perhaps that ancient jar of marjoram still has one good sprinkle left in it. Or maybe, just maybe, the flavors will all blend together in a way that's swell, at least different. And so, you season, you sprinkle, you pray. Because in Victorian England, spices aren't just about taste. They're about survival, distraction, and the faint, spicy hope that tomorrow's dinner might just taste like something you'd willingly eat. If nothing else, at least you'll never know what your food really tasted like underneath all that nutmeg. It's snack time, Victorian style. The children beg for penny sweets from the corner shop. But you know these candies are more likely to contain ground-up chalk, lead, or a faint whiff of the Industrial Revolution itself. If you're feeling indulgent, there's always treacle, thick, sticky, and only slightly less appealing than licking the bottom of a coal bin. No wonder Victorian children grew up so quickly. Their snacks were an early lesson in disappointment. Let's set the scene. You're a Victorian child, pockets jingling with a hard-earned penny, eyes wide at the dazzling array of glass jars in the local sweet shop. There are striped sticks, barley sugar twists, licorice wheels, humbugs, and things called bullseyes and acid drops that promise adventure and probably a little dental trauma. The shop smells of sugar, candle wax, and the faint ozone tang of progress. But beneath the innocent glimmer of the sweets lies a universe of hazards. Victorian confectioners, eager to stretch their profits and unconcerned with modern concepts like safety or longevity, were famous for their creativity. Many candies got their brilliant colours from the periodic table: red from lead, green from arsenic, and white from ground-up chalk. Candy floss was more a philosophical concept than a snack, and anything that sparkled was best viewed as a health warning in disguise. You take your penny and point to a jar of bonbons. The shopkeeper, a relic himself, tips a few out into a twist of paper, always careful to give you the ones that look the least likely to shatter teeth on contact. You pop one in your mouth, feeling the sharp tang of fruit flavor and the slow realization that you might just have chipped a molar. Still, you don't complain. This is the height of childhood luxury. And nothing builds character like biting into something that may or may not be part plaster of Paris. If you're lucky, Mum has treacle at home, Britain's answer to the question, what if syrup was sticky enough to be considered a building material? Treacle is thick, dark, and so sweet it makes your eyes water. Spread on bread, or, if you're truly decadent, eaten straight from the spoon, It's the treat that keeps on giving, mainly because it will be stuck to your teeth for days. Children love it, adults tolerate it, and dentists quietly invest in larger homes. Of course, the snacks aren't limited to sweets. Roasted chestnuts might be available from a street vendor, but you'll have to compete with the local wildlife and the vendor's own sense of fair play. There are parkin cakes made with oats and ginger that are both chewy and suspiciously filling, as if designed to tide you over until adulthood. And for the truly desperate, there's always bread dipped in dripping, a treat so humble it makes even treacle seem posh. Every so often, a new snack craze sweeps the playground. Maybe it's Spanish licorice, which tastes faintly of medicine and regret, or cough lozenges that double as both candy and preventative health measure. The bravest try salmiak, salted licorice from the continent, which is best described as an acquired taste, and usually acquired under duress. As you watch Victorian children dash out of the shop, pockets full and faces sticky, you marvel at their resilience. Their teeth may be crumbling, their sweets may be half minerals, but their joy is undeniable. Snack time is an exercise in optimism, bravery, and rapid adaptation. Every bite is a leap of faith, every chew a small act of rebellion against the blandness of boiled cabbage and stew. So you finish your chalky sweet, chase it with a spoonful of treacle, and carry on. Because in Victorian England, childhood snacks aren't just about sugar, they're about survival, ingenuity, and learning, very early on, that disappointment is always just one bite away. As winter drags on, you realize that pickling isn't just a quirky hobby, it's a survival mechanism. Victorians will pickle anything that doesn't run away fast enough. Vegetables, eggs, even walnuts find themselves swimming in mysterious brine. Opening a jar is always a gamble. Will it be edible, or will it remind you of why food preservation laws are a good idea? Welcome to the glorious, vinegar-soaked world of Victorian food preservation, a world where the motto is waste not, want not, worry later. As autumn's bounty fades and fresh vegetables become a rumour whispered by wistful grandmothers, the household turns to rows of glass jars lurking in the pantry, each sealed with hope, wax, and a little bit of denial. First up, the vegetables. Cucumbers are obvious victims, but Victorians are not picky. Anything vaguely vegetal is fair game. Carrots, onions, cauliflower, even the odd stray bean. Everything gets chopped, layered, and submerged in a brine so strong it could probably double as industrial cleaner. The theory is that vinegar and salt kill anything dangerous. The reality is that sometimes what's dangerous just learns to swim. Pickled onions are especially popular, famous for their ability to turn even the most stoic diner's face inside out. Crisp, sharp, and with the lingering aroma of a well-travelled boot, they're the perfect side dish for cold meats, cheese, or any meal in need of a little excitement. There's always an uncle who insists he can eat 3 without blinking, and a cousin who tries, fails, and spends the next hour quietly weeping in the scullery. Then there are the pickled eggs, those strange pastel spheres floating serenely in cloudy jars. You eye them with suspicion, trying to recall the last time you saw a chicken in the yard. Pickled eggs are the Victorian bar snack of choice, portable, indestructible, and always ready for a dare. The first bite is always a shock. The yolk somehow both chalky and rubbery, the white infused with pure, unfiltered vinegar. Still, they're filling, and in February, that's enough. For the truly adventurous, there's pickled walnuts. These start life as tender green nuts, then undergo a transformation involving soaking, brining, and a final mysterious stage in which they turn black and begin to resemble prehistoric relics. The taste? Earthy, tangy, and slightly medicinal. Victorians serve them with cheese, cold beef, or as a test of character at family gatherings. Eating one is a rite of passage. Surviving one is a mark of pride. Of course, not every jar is a success story. The pantry shelves are littered with experiments gone wrong, turnips that fizz when opened, beans that have achieved a new, alarming shade of blue, and one jar that hisses ominously whenever someone walks by. There's an unspoken rule: if it pops, foams, or talks back, it goes straight to the compost. Nobody discusses the incident with the pickled cabbage of 57. But when it works, pickling is magic. A drab winter meal suddenly has a burst of flavour, a jolt of colour, and the distinct possibility of heartburn. The jars are opened at Sunday dinner, Christmas, or whenever the last potato has finally given up hope. You pile your plate with pickled everything, alternating bites of sharp, salty vegetables with slabs of cheese and dense brown bread. The flavours are intense, unapologetic, and oddly comforting, a taste of the past, bottled and bravely faced. And so, with every bite, you honour generations of Victorians who preserved not just their food, but their sanity through endless winters and limited options. Because in Victorian England, pickling isn't just a way to survive the cold months, it's a celebration of ingenuity, endurance, and the undeniable truth that, with enough vinegar, you can eat almost anything, even if you shouldn't. You hear the merry jingle of the street ice cream seller and think, finally a treat. Then you remember, Victorian ice cream isn't made with cream but with questionable milk, odd flavourings, and sometimes a touch of sawdust to stretch the batch. Eating it is like rolling the dice. Will you get a cold, sweet delight, or just a brain freeze followed by 3 days off work with digestive issues? Let's take a stroll down a bustling Victorian street. The air smells of coal, smoke and horse, but weaving through the crowds is the unmistakable call of the ice cream vendor. Ices, ices. Pennies for a penny lick. Children dash over, clutching copper coins and dreams of sugar, while adults eye the cart with equal parts longing and trepidation. The cart itself is a work of art, painted signs, a battered bell, and a mysterious cooling compartment that may or may not involve a block of river ice wrapped in flannel and blind faith. You step up and hand over your penny. In return, you receive the legendary penny lick, a small glass cup with a single scoop of ice cream perched precariously inside. Licking is the only approved method of eating, and when you're done, the cup goes right back to the vendor, who gives it a quick wipe and hands it to the next customer. Hygiene is a concept for future generations. Right now, you're focused on the main event, the ice cream itself. Victorian ice cream, despite its name, is often more ice than cream. Real cream is expensive, and milk is, well, let's just say it's open to interpretation. Many batches are stretched with flour, arrowroot, or, in the worst cases, a sprinkle of sawdust for extra texture. Flavours are imaginative. Vanilla, when available, lemon, if you don't mind the zest being whatever citrus happened to be cheapest, and the notorious water ices, frozen, flavoured sugar water that manages to be both sweet and oddly gritty. And then there are the more adventurous flavours. Burnt sugar, lavender, orange blossom, even Parmesan or brown bread ice cream for those feeling experimental or just unlucky. The colouring is bright and sometimes suspicious. Pistachio ice cream is a lurid green, but the only real nuts involved are the ones buying it. Chocolate is rare and reserved for special occasions or for customers who don't ask too many questions about what made it brown. The texture is another gamble. Sometimes it's soft and creamy, a minor miracle. More often it's grainy or crunchy with ice crystals, and occasionally you hit a patch that feels like biting into the bottom of a frozen puddle. If you're very unlucky, you discover a chewy bit that probably began life as part of the vendor's last broom. But even with all the hazards, there's something magical about Victorian ice cream. On a hot day, that cold, sweet jolt is worth every risk. You savour each lick, careful not to eat too quickly, and invite the dreaded ice cream headache, a condition Victorians refer to as brain freeze, or, more accurately, nature's way of warning you about second helpings. Of course, the aftermath is never certain. Some escape unscathed, others spend the next day or two reacquainting themselves with the chamber pot. Street ice cream is both a treat and a test of fortitude, a culinary rite of passage as much about resilience as refreshment. As you hand back your sticky glass for its next adventure, you realize you've joined a proud tradition, the eternal optimism of Victorian snackers. No matter the risks, no matter the mysteries lurking beneath the frosty surface, you'll be back next week, penny in hand, ready for another round of hope, cold sugar, and that unmistakable Victorian sense of adventure. Because in Victorian England, ice cream isn't just dessert, it's a leap of faith, a community experience, and, occasionally, a surprisingly effective way to build herd immunity. Welcome to the future. Food in a tin. It's convenient, revolutionary, and almost certainly unsafe. Early canning technology means you're never sure if you're opening a wholesome meal or a can of botulism. Still, nothing says Victorian optimism like ignoring that ominous bulge in the lid and hoping for the best. After all, who needs fresh food when you have progress in a can? Let's set the stage. The pantry shelf gleams with mysterious metal cylinders, each labelled with promises of prime beef, preserved peaches, or the ever-suspicious assorted meats. You marvel at this marvel, food sealed away from the ravages of time, mice, and the suspicious glances of neighbours. The tin opener, a relatively new invention itself, sits nearby, more a weapon than a utensil, ready to do battle with the fortress-like seams of a Victorian can. Opening a tin is an act of faith and upper body strength. You twist, prod, and finally jab your way through the lid, hoping you don't lose a finger or gain a lifelong fear of metallic smells. Sometimes there's a satisfying pop, sometimes a hiss, and sometimes, worryingly, an alarming bulge or hiss that suggests you're about to unleash more than just supper. Still, you persist, because this is the Victorian age. Progress, industry, and a healthy disregard for personal safety. Inside, the contents are they're something. Tinned meats are a Victorian sensation. Bully beef, tongue, ham, or deviled chicken, all submerged in a gelatinous sea that can only be described as texturally ambitious. You scoop it onto a plate, watching as the quivering mass shimmies into the light, and try to recall when you last ate meat that didn't glisten with a protective coating of aspic. The flavour is always a surprise, sometimes salty, sometimes metallic, often a bit of both, with a hint of maybe this used to be chicken. Fruits are another adventure. Tinned peaches, pears, or plums slosh around in syrup so thick you could use it to patch a leaky roof. Victorian children love the stuff. Not because it tastes like fruit, but because it's the closest thing to dessert that doesn't involve risking a trip to the dentist. Adults pretend to be impressed, praising the modern miracle while quietly calculating how much longer the pantry will last if nobody gets food poisoning this week. The real thrill is in the variety tins, assorted meats, mixed vegetables, or the enigmatic luncheon loaf. Each can is a lucky dip, and every meal is a game of identify that flavour. Beans turn up in a disconcerting shade of green. Carrots are suspiciously mushy. The odd tin of soup promises hearty nourishment but delivers a pale, watery broth flecked with mysterious floating bits and the vague sense of regret. Of course, not all tins are trustworthy. Early canning methods are a blend of science, guesswork, and pure Victorian bravado. Some tins rust from the inside out, others swell ominously on the shelf, daring you to take your chances. Everyone knows someone who once ate a tin of salmon and lived to regret it. Still, the allure of shelf-stable food is irresistible, a small insurance policy against famine, winter, and the disappointment of the local butcher. In the end, you scrape your plate, thank the gods of industry for your semi-edible feast, and quietly hope the next tin will be better. Maybe one day, you think, they'll invent a way to make tinned food both safe and delicious. Until then, you eat with one eye on your fork and the other on the can, ready for whatever Victorian progress has packed away for you. Because in the world of tinned food, every meal is a gamble, every can is an adventure, and nothing says modern living quite like serving up dinner with a side of existential dread. So tonight, as you settle into your soft bed, one that, miraculously, doesn't smell like old cabbage, isn't stuffed with sawdust, and probably won't give you food poisoning, take a moment to appreciate just how far dinner has come. The Victorians fought a daily battle with their meals, negotiating with bread that doubled as a construction material, praying over every questionable pie, and surviving more boiled cabbage than should be legally allowed. They endured chalk in their bread, arsenic in their sweets, and a government that responded to food safety scandals with a gentle shrug and a new tax. But through all the boiled roots, sour milk, and suspicious meat, they survived. They laughed at their Sunday roasts, clung to their cups of tea, and, against all odds, invented some of the snacks and rituals we still enjoy today, though, thankfully, with a lot less lead. So, as you drift off tonight, wrapped in clean sheets, stomach full of food you can identify, and not a single pickled walnut in sight, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to the generations who paved the way. Their resilience, resourcefulness, and, let's be honest, sheer stubbornness got us to a world where the riskiest thing in your fridge is expired oat milk and not an entire can of regret. History may be strange, gross, and occasionally deadly, but it's also proof that people are resourceful, hopeful, and always ready to try a new recipe, even if it might kill them. Sleep well, knowing that your midnight snack is only a few steps away, and that, statistically, it won't contain sawdust. Good night.